Welcome back. Thanks for staying with Morning Live. Time to focus in on sports and something that's been a talking point since Saturday. Despite SuperSport management not having a final outcome on the fallout between rugby analyst and former Springbok player Ashwin Willemse and his colleagues Nasport and Nick Mallet, they have stated that what happened was not racially motivated. However, when Willemse walked out of the SuperSport set, it sparked serious comment on social media. Tweets and conversation on several platforms by the public have commented on experiencing the same sentiments as that of Willemse of being patronised, insulted and exposed to racism in the workplace. Joining us now to chat further about the incident is Heindrich Wyngaard. He is the co-author of Willemse's biography, Rugby Changed My Life. And also joining us on the telephone line from Port Elizabeth is Thando Manana, a former national player and recently penned his very own story, being a Black Springbok. Good morning to the both of you and welcome to Morning Live.
Happy to be here, thank you.
Heindrich, I'm going to start with you.
And good morning to the viewers.
Heindrich, I'm going to start with you. You obviously know Ashwin on a very personal level, a very deep, intimate level, having co-authored his autobiography. What kind of a person is he? Because following this incident, some people have said perhaps it was just an emotional outburst.
Thanks for the opportunity, but I can assure you, having known Ashwin from growing up in Caledon, a little town in the Western Cape, he is not what he's now portrayed to be by those who don't agree with his behavior or action on Saturday evening. He is a very pleasant guy, he is an emotionally mature guy, and I think what simply happened on Saturday was that he got to a point where he decided the best way of making the kind of behavior or the kind of treatment that he's been receiving over a time to make that known to all the viewers, which is what happened. Now, whether one agrees with how he did it or not, I think it was simply a matter of him getting to that point where he felt this is the last straw. But it doesn't make him an emotional creature or someone who would act emotionally. Or, in fact, if you look at that clip, you'll see he's doing it very calmly, and he is stating to Nas Botha and Nick Mallet very calmly what his grievance with them are.
Thando, you mentioned the same thing in a tweet where you actually shared the video clip of the walkout of the SuperSport studio, and you said it was always going to happen. Briefly talk to us about that alleged strange relationship, specifically between Nick Mallet and Ashwin.
Yeah. Look, I think firstly and foremost, Ashwin, it's always important to understand that as an analyst, you all are analyzing the same game that, the panel had been watching. Obviously, the opinions will differ. But I get a sense that in his environment, it was just a matter of when the hard talks were really pushed forward. He was a bit isolated and was made as if he was talking on something that he generally did not fully understand, whether from a player's perspective or from a coaching perspective. Because where he comes from a player's perspective only. The other gentlemen having played and also coached the game. Nas obviously didn't coach the game, but he played the game. But for me, I just got a sense that as Nick Mallet, he had occupied two hats, one of being a coach at international level and also provincial level, also being a player, felt that he was superior than the other people. But look at the amount of work that Ashwin has done over the years. He's speaking truth, and whenever you speak truth to power, unfortunately, that's what happens. You get a bit isolated, and therefore for me it was so important that I stand at his viewpoint, because if we don't stand together as people, we will always be, no one will always be on our side or will always be in our case in terms of not doing the work. I mean, if you look at the Afrikaans newspaper saying that, he doesn't do his work properly. Since when doesn't he do his work properly? But they had to find something to shield so that to make them Ashwin the villain here and not actually the hero of standing up. And for me, there is no rule in any corporate, that says you cannot walk out, because I think for me, his dignity was insulted. At that point, he decided that, at this time, I cannot continue working under this same group of people I'm working with.
So, Thando, what I'm getting from you is that this was not necessarily racial, but rather that it was patronizing behavior and questioning his integrity and questioning his intelligence about the game of rugby. Am I correct in making that assumption? Because SuperSport told the media yesterday that there was no racism involved in the incident.
Well, what happens behind the scenes sometimes was also not stirred by the super sport management, and that is what for me was the drawing point, because one of the things is Ashwin was apparently told also that he is one of the players that benefited from transformation. Now, that was not said on air, but what I'm saying is it was not for everyone to see, but it happened behind the scenes, and for me it's always problematic, and also shows you that there are bigger problems that need to be addressed at that institution whenever it comes to sport and also to people that are there, because they go on the sort of we want to satisfy the niche market, which is your higher LSM. Understand that they are treating the higher LSM, and therefore for them to have maybe Ashwin, it's a matter of also accommodating the lower LSM that can afford to watch on those special bouquets. So for me, I get a sense that it's been happening since 2014, but also for me, I was just quite glad that it did eventually happen, so that all the guys that are there get their earned and respect that they deserve, rightfully so, because the opinions will never be the same. In South Africa, we're so afraid to go at hard talks and speaking truth to the powers. That is why that you'll find Valen and also South Africa, that you'll always have this super sport being the PR of South African rugby, sugarcoating whatever wrong is being done, but also praising the good that is done. And it doesn't work that way. You've got to level the playing field. You've got to know exactly what we lack in South Africa at the rugby institution, but also what we're missing. We're missing to be also recognized as the greatest rugby nation, because we've lost that in terms of the ranking and so forth, because we have a body that sugarcoats and also does good PR for South African rugby in this country.
Heindrich, in your opinion, following what SuperSport said, that this wasn't a racially motivated incident, what's your opinion?
Well, first, Valen, I understand that there's a business relationship between SA Rugby and SuperSport. So I don't agree with Thando when he criticizes SuperSport as being a PR agency for SA Rugby. That's the product that they're selling. That's what makes people subscribe. Now, having said that, there is fingers pointing at SuperSport in the sense that, as Thando also pointed out, we've seen the tension on air since 2014, maybe even earlier. And in 2016, I also wrote about an incident that really that went viral between Ashwin and Nick Mallett, which had little to do with the disagreement or the robust discussions of the match, as SuperSport's CEO told us last night. The analysts were encouraged to do. It had more to do with another word that Thando used, that superior behavior. And that's what Nick Mallett, unfortunately, has been doing all along. And let me just tell you that he's also done it to his fellow white commentators. So now Botha is also at the receiving end of that. Maybe he doesn't take it as bad as I would, because of them being, boykies and me having grown up as on the receiving end of apartheid. But that's another story for another day. So I think SuperSport needs to own up. Because if they didn't notice the tension, it says a lot about management at that company, but also says a lot about the company culture. And here is one of the questions that the incident raises. Are there not a code of conduct for the presenters or the analysts, or are they just giving free rein? Or might it be that someone like Nick Mallett just doesn't listen to the floor manager or the producer telling him, hey, you need to now rep so that we can give your fellow panelists also a chance to speak. So when one listens to what Ashwin says, in the first clip, he is inviting Nick and Nas to respond, and they sort of laugh at him. Oh no, we said enough before the match, so you can speak now. And then already he says, well, let's not patronize each other here. When he's given another chance to speak, then he addresses that experience of being patronized and marginalized by telling them that during my playing days, I was labeled a quota player, and I had to fight very hard and work very hard to become the Ashwin Willemse, who is now a respected commentator and an analyst. And now I have to stand here and be patronized by two individuals again who comes from a different era. The Nas and Nick supporters then jumps onto that bandwagon and says, simply because Ashwin used the A word, and then they label him again a quota player. They tell the media or some of his colleagues, because clearly that kind of information that says he wasn't well prepared, etc., that comes from inside. So now his character is being assassinated. Anyone who ever watches will hear when Ashwin speaks about the game, he knows rugby. And if Nas and Nick felt that he wasn't really doing his bit as he should do, why didn't they complain to management then? So I don't take that story very serious. Ashwin Willemse became what a lot of us have not been prepared to do in our environments, whether that's in the Springbok rugby team, whether it is in a soapie on television, whether it is in the corporate environment. And it is so telling that yesterday when I was driving to work, I saw two posters. The one said, "Celebs fear to expose abuse." The other one said, "Support for Ashwin Willemse." And what happened with Ashwin Willemse, well, in what he's telling us, is a kind of abuse that is also not spoken about.
Does it speak to just this idea of white privilege, that it's not even, and in its manifestations, that's what causes the frustration? So it's not necessarily massively overt.
There might be an element of that. But one also hears, let's say, white females relating the same kind of experience in the workplace, patronizing and marginalization. And so it's easy then to say, but they're still white and they still enjoy white privilege outside. I mean, Natasha Mazzoni of the DA, she had to deal with that kind of criticism, and rightly so, very recently, when she tried to equate her father having been dark, coming from Italy, and compare that with how black people suffered and still suffers in the country. So yes, there might be an element of white privilege, but as I pointed out, remember Nick, the dominant figure, also interrupts the other panelists. And so it says more about Nick's personality than him being racist, because I also know the very same Nick Mallet during the apartheid years spoke out against the behavior, or rather the treatment, that the first black or coloured Springbok, Errol Tobias, received, who I also, if I may add, wrote a book about last year. So does it make him racist? I wouldn't just go there, because then you also make it easier for his defenders, for his supporters, sure, to then label you and label Ashwin. We should talk about how we treat each other as human beings, and when do we become equals, when we're supposed to be equals as fellow panelists, regardless of the age difference, the gender, the generation gap, and whether you played 10 tests and I only played 2, or whether you scored 5 tries and I scored 20. It's not relevant. Sure. You are placed there because of the knowledge that you have about this game, and that should be respected.
This conversation can carry on, and thank you so much for your comments. I just want to quickly bring Thando in here one last time. Thando, do you agree with the ministry that say that Nas and Nick should be suspended?
Well, I think if everyone is to be, if someone is to be suspended, then the whole panel should be suspended. And then for me, an independent board to investigate the situation or whatever happened at the end of the past weekend to be investigated by a private investigation board. For me, that would do well. I think as far as the sports ministry then is concerned, maybe a bit ill-advised on their side in terms of coming up and jumping out of the bandwagon and not really putting their own things on the table, rather than saying suspend the two, but who then do you leave out? Do you leave Ashwin Willemse? What then happens? So I think for me, the condensation attitude is always difficult to prove valent, but it is the pain that is felt, which is real, and I felt the pain. But what happens then, today you also have the sports having their own budget in Cape Town, so maybe an opportunity for the sports minister to sit down with South African rugby, as they also been invited, to really come to a much quicker solution on what really happened. But really tough actions have to be taken, and I think for me there's only one thing I'd like to say, is that we're still fighting racism and racism in rugby. That was quite eminently clear throughout the last couple of days, and whether people would want to sugarcoat that's their own problem. But for me, I think rugby is not unified. It's not been unified. It's always have its problem, but the problems are much bigger than the playing field. Is also quite evident on the outside as well, that certain opinions matter. certain opinions of other people do not matter. And for me, that's worrisome, it's troublesome, and also I think it's mind-boggling that after so many years that we still sit here and we discuss and we protect certain people, and also we annihilate the other type of minority, which is black people that are in the sport, that want to be in the sport, that also have played the sport over 100 years. We should be treated equally, and I think our government is failing us on that regard, especially the sport ministry.
Two very honest gentlemen sharing their thoughts this morning. Heindrich in studio, thank you so much for coming through to Morning Live and sharing with us. And Thando on the line, thank you very much for joining us from Port Elizabeth. Speaking about Ashwin Willemse's SuperSport studio walkout, which grabbed the headlines on Saturday. Let's quickly bring you that sport trivia as we promised.